Section 24 of A Daughter of the Sioux. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mary Rhodey. A Daughter of the Sioux by General Charles King. Chapter 24. The Death Song of the Sioux. That was a gruesome night at Frayne. Just at tattoo, the door leading to the little cell room had been thrown open, and the sergeant of the guard bade the prisoners come forth. All warriors of the Oglala band, and foremost of their number was Eagle Wing, the battle leader. Recaptured by Crabb and his men after a desperate flight and fight for liberty, he had apparently been planning ever since a second essay even more desperate. In sullen silence he had passed his days, showing no sign of recognition of any face among his guards until the morning Kennedy appeared. All malice forgotten now that his would-be slayer was a helpless prisoner, and therefore did the Irishman greet him jovially. "That man would knife you if he had half a chance," said the sergeant. "Watch out for him." "You bet I'll watch out," said Kennedy, never dreaming that, despite all search and vigilance, Moreau had managed to obtain and hide a knife. In silence they had shuffled forth into the corridor. The heavy portal swung behind them, confining the other two. Another door opened into the guard room proper, where stood the big, red hot stove, and where waited the two blacksmiths with the irons. Once in the guard room every window was barred, and members of the guard, three deep, blocked in eager curiosity the doorway leading to the outer air. In the corridor on one side stood three infantry soldiers with fixed bayonets, on the other, facing them, three others of the guard. Between them shuffled the Sioux, Wing leading. One glance at the waiting blacksmiths was enough. With the spring of a tiger he hurled himself, head foremost and bending low, straight at the open doorway, and split his way through the astonished guards like center rush at football, scattering them right and left, then darted round the corner of the guardhouse, agile as a cat. And there was Kennedy confronting him. One furious lunge he made with gleaming knife, then shot like an arrow straight for the southward bluff. It was bad judgment. He trusted to speed, to dim starlight, to bad aim, perhaps, but the little Irishman dropped on one knee, and the first bullet tore through the muscles of a stalwart arm. The second, better aimed, pierced the vitals. Then they were on him, men by the dozen in another instant, as he staggered and fell there, impotent and writhing. They bore him to the cell again. The hospital was too far, and Waller and his aides came speedily to do all that surgery could accomplish, but he cursed them back. He raved at Ray, who entered leading poor, sobbing little Fawn Eyes, and demanded to be left alone with her. Waller went out to minister to Kennedy, bleeding fast, and the others looked to Ray for orders when the door was once more opened and Blake entered with Nanette. "By the general's order," said he, in brief explanation, and in an instant she was on her knees beside the dying Sioux. There and thus they left them. Waller said there was nothing to be done. The junior surgeon, Tracy, he whom she had so fascinated only those few weeks before, bent and whispered, "Call me if you need. I shall remain within hearing." But there came no call. At taps the door was once more softly opened, and Tracy peered within. Fawn Eyes, rocking to and fro, was sobbing in an abandonment of grief. Nanette, face downward, lay prone upon a stilled and lifeless heart. Flint and his escort duly went their way and spread their story as they camped at Laramie and the Chug. The general tarried another week at Frayne. There was still very much to keep him there, so not until he and Black Bill came down did we at other stations learn the facts. The general, as usual, had little to say. The colonel talked for both. A woeful time, it seems, they had had with poor Nanette when at last it became necessary to take her away from her dead brave. She raged and raved at even her pleading aunt. Defiant of them all, from the general down, and reckless of law or fact, she vowed it was all a conspiracy to murder Moreau in cold blood. They gave him the knife, she declared, although it later developed that she had tossed it through the open window. They had given him the chance to escape, the sight of Kennedy, who had striven to kill him twice before, and then of the blacksmiths, with their degrading shackles, all just to tempt him to make a dash for freedom, just as they had lured and murdered Crazy Horse, his brave kinsman, not 10 years before, then had placed a dead shot on the path to life and liberty. A man who killed him in cold blood, as deliberately planned. These were her accusations, and that story took strong hold in certain circles in the Far East, where love of truth inspired its widespread publication, but not its contradiction when the facts became known. The same conditions obtain today in dealing with affairs across the sea. Nanette said many other things before her final breakdown, and Hay and his sorrowing wife found their load of care far heaviest, for the strain of Indian blood, now known to all, had steeled the soul of the girl against the people at Fort Frayne, men and women both, against none so vehemently as those who would have shown her sympathy, none so malignantly as those who had suffered for her sake. This was especially true of Field. In the mad hope of getting justice, as she termed it, for the dead, she had demanded speech of the general, and in presence of Black Bill and the surgeon, he had given her a hearing. It proved fatal to her cause, for in her fury at what she termed the triumph of his foes, she lost all sense of right or reason, and declared that it was Field who had warned Stabber's band and sent them fleeing to unite with Lame Wolf. Field, who took the traitors' horses and rode by night with Kennedy to warn them it was Webb's intention to surround the village at dawn and make prisoners of the men. It was Field, she said, who furnished the money Moreau needed to establish his claim to a gold mine in the Black Hills, the ownership of which would make them rich and repay Field a dozen times over. It was Field who sought to protect her kindred among the Sioux, in hopes, she said it boldly, of winning her. But the general had heard enough. The door was opened and Ray and Blake were ushered in. The former briefly told of the finding of her note in Field's room the night the adjutant was so mysteriously missing. The note itself was held forth by the inspector general, and she was asked if she cared to have it opened and read aloud. Her answer was that Field was a coward, a dastard, to betray a woman who had trusted him. "Oh, he didn't," said Blake, dryly. "'Twas just the other way. He couldn't be induced to open his head, so his friends took a hand. You got word of the outbreak through your Indian followers. You wrote to Field and sent the note by Pete, bidding him join you at that godless hour, telling him that you would provide the horses and that you must ride to Stabber's camp to see Moreau for the last time, as he was going at once to the Black Hills. You made Field believe he was your half-brother instead of what he was. You brought Moreau back to the post and took something, I can't say what, down to him from Mr. Hayes, he waiting for you on the flats below the Trader's Corral. You should have worn your moccasins as well as a divided skirt that night, instead of French-heeled bottines. The rest others can tell." The others were Kennedy and the recaptured, half-recalcitrant Pete. The latter turned state's evidence. Kennedy told how he had wandered down into the flats after the few drinks that made him think scornful of Sioux, of his encounter with Eagle Wing, his rescue by Field and a girl who spoke Sioux like a native. He thought it was little Fawn Eyes when he heard her speak, and until he heard this lady. Then he understood. He had been pledged to secrecy by the lieutenant, and never meant to tell a soul, but when he heard the lie the lady told about the lieutenant, it ended any promise. Then Pete, an abject, whining wretch, was ushered in, And his story, when dragged out by the roots, was worst of all.